I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Allison LaFerlita. I am the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. If you are unfamiliar with our organization, we are a trade association that provides support, education, resources, and a ton of information to our nonprofit industry. We are 5 years young and we've grown exponentially. We have over 400 associate members and nonprofit partners combined. We offer mostly everything to the nonprofit community free of charge. We are really delighted that you're here to join us today. This is just another benefit of being a nonprofit partner with the Hub. If you are not, I would encourage you to please go on our website and join. It's very easy. It takes less than 3 minutes, and you'll have access to amazing workshops like this and much, much more. So go ahead to nonprofitresourcehub.org, become a nonprofit partner, and you'll hear from us immediately. Again, I'm Allison LaFerlita, Executive Director. Should you have any questions during or after this, you can put them in the chat or give me a call or an email afterward, and we'll be happy to connect you with Shari. So without further ado, let's introduce our speaker today. We have Shari Simpson, Senior Manager at Paylocity. Shari has 16 plus years as an HR practitioner in multiple industries, including local government, manufacturing, real estate, B2B sales, and technology union and non-union populations. So you are speaking to a seasoned professional who is really here to help you gain more experience, gain more knowledge, and she'll share her wisdom with you. If you have any questions, let us know. Go ahead and put it in the chat. So, Shari, welcome.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm going to start introducing myself as such and such years young. I love that, as you shared a little bit about your company. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my presentation for you all. Hopefully you can all see that. So what we're here to talk about today is reinventing the employee experience. So I want to start with, where have we been on this journey in this changing landscape of work over the last 3 years? You know, I think back to right before the pandemic hit. I was traveling for actually an employee experience conference. I was coming back from Florida. It was probably February 26th, 27th. And I remember saying to my boss, hey, I think it's kind of weird. There was all these people wearing masks on the plane. Like, is this really a big deal? You know, it seems like not something we have to be concerned about too much here in the US. And just to think, about 2 weeks later, we went into that lockdown on March 13th. So it's just amazing to think about how quickly things have changed over the last couple of years. We saw the murder of George Floyd and the rise of the social justice movement. We had a very controversial presidential election. We're heading into another controversial presidential election. We had things like the Great Resignation and talent shortages. We have the war in Ukraine and impactful legislation changes that impacted our employees. We have ChatGPT coming online in November of 2022, and we just recently had a major wireless outage. So it's not to say that we aren't experiencing change all the time as business and HR professionals, but it's something that our employees are experiencing as well. And so we've seen out of this this shift in personal values and how employees look at work. You can see it on the screen, but I feel like everybody just took a step back, took a deep breath, reevaluated their priorities and said, okay, what's most important to me? Some of the things we started to see was conversations around making a difference in social responsibility. We've started to get at Paylocity questions during our interview process about our carbon footprint. So if you aren't getting those yet, you will get them. People are more concerned about social responsibility and our impact to the environment than they ever have before. I'm going to talk a little bit later about flexibility, that this idea of flexibility has definitely changed, and it's a focus more on adaptability, both for the employee and the employer. Well-being has definitely been an important product that we've had to talk about, but it's really changed from just mental health to talking about holistic health, which is a change we've been seeing. We've also seen businesses move into care as a business model, introducing more authenticity and transparency. And then social, right? We've had to stay connected. We've had to figure this out in our environments, whether you are still fully on site, hybrid, or fully remote now. The social component continues to be a high priority. We've actually seen that the World Health Organization recently has started a task force on loneliness. So it's not something that's going away when we think about how we've shifted these personal values. And what is on top of that is we're going to add a little bit of generational information. So as you think about Gen Z coming into the workforce, that where they are now, they want a broader access to different skills. You're going to see them ask within their first 90 days, hey, how do I get promoted? Right? And you might be thinking, you've been here 90 days. What do you mean, how do you get promoted? But that's a very genuine question. They want to understand what their path is to promotion, what their skill set's going to be looking like, what opportunities you're providing them to increase their skill set. And we're seeing this on the heels of this shift from traditional job descriptions to a more skills-based family approach of looking at jobs. So you're going to have to really rethink development for that Gen Z group. And I want to give you a little peek at what's coming for Gen Alpha. So it's pretty interesting as you think about them. They're going to be the best educated. They're going to be technologically immersed. It's really going to challenge us as HR professionals to make sure that we are just as tech savvy as this generation coming in, and that we're providing the right tools and resources for them. So this leads us to the future of work, right? I think a lot of people have thought about this as just another catchphrase, right? Like quiet quitting or all the greats, right? Great resignation, great reshuffle, great regret. This term is going to stick with us. It really refers to the changes and trends that we are seeing or expect to see shape the way we work in the next coming years. So first one I want to talk about is automation and artificial intelligence. If you're not using ChatGPT to help you out, start using it. Even if it's as simple as, hey, you're going to go in and experiment for yourself personally. I was explaining this to my sister the other day. She's a stay-at-home mom, and she was like, hey, why in the world would I use ChatGPT? I feel like it's not a resource for me. Well, she's really into crocheting. And so we hopped on ChatGPT and asked it to create a crochet pattern for a unicorn with a purple horn, and it did it lovely and spit it out. So there's so many great resources and tools when it comes to AI and ChatGPT specifically. I'd love for you to share in the chat if it's something that you're doing now and how you're utilizing it, just to give each other some ideas. The next thing is work flexibility. I'm going to get into this a little bit more on a further slide, but our definition of work flexibility has changed. It used to be that you could have, that little carrot of, hey, you can be remote once a day, or maybe flexibility was like, hey, we do Jeans Friday. Those things aren't cutting it anymore. Flexibility means something very different. We're also seeing the rise of the gig economy, both outside our org and inside our orgs. So think about your different populations that are doing multiple jobs, right? You might have somebody who's full-time who's also delivering for DoorDash or something like that. I already talked about the change in skills-based. The way we're going to think about job architecture is going to change. DEI, A and B. So if you don't know what A and B are, A is accessibility, B is belonging. This is no longer a check the box. This is going to be the bedrock of how we think about our organizations going forward. Sustainability, I already talked about that a little bit. And then results-oriented work. As we think about the future of work, this is something we're going to have to continue to redefine. So I think managers in the past would say, well, hey, if I can see you working, then you must be working, right? But I think we all learned very early on in our careers how to quickly switch our screens, right? If we were looking at something that wasn't work related. Now, if you have a hybrid environment or you have those that are remote, how are you defining what work looks like and what good results are? And so it's really moving from this idea of I can see you working to I'm measuring your actual results and the output of the work you're doing. So this is what we're seeing when it comes to the future of work. And so this leads us to this idea around employee experience. And I want to read this definition word for word because I think Gartner does such a great job of defining this for us. Employee experience is the way in which employees internalize, interpret the interactions they have with their organizations, as well as the context that underlines those interactions. That last piece is so important. The context that underlines those interactions. Employees know if you're being transparent. They know if you're giving them all the information as to what's happening and why decisions are being made. That is part of their lived experience in your organizations. So it's important that you make sure that you are explaining the context when you are making decisions and introducing new programs and creating better experiences for them. And if you're thinking, why does it matter, right? Why do I need to focus on employee experience? think about employee experience like customer experience. You want your employees to have the same sort of good feels that they have when they're walking into, let's say, their favorite shop, or they're buying their favorite products, right? Are you regularly communicating with them? Are you asking for feedback? Are you introducing new things, right? All the things we get excited about when it comes to a great customer experience, our employees want that as well. And so that's really shifting our mindset to create a new experience. So I'm going to ask the audience something. Hopefully I can see the chat. So go ahead and drop this in the chat. As you look at this picture on the right hand side that I have of this person, what are some immediate thoughts that come to mind? What do you think is happening in the picture? I'll let you guys go ahead and post the chat in the chat. I'll kind of watch that. Because I'm curious what your gut reaction is to this picture. Allison, I might ask you because I don't see anybody in the chat yet. So when you look at this picture, Allison, what is something that comes to your mind right away?
Oh, it's so funny. I just wrote it. I wrote, she looks like she's leaving for a better gig.
I love that. Yep. A couple others. She's sitting at her desk, someone joining the team. I will tell you, this group so far has been probably the most positive group I've talked to. Because most people look at this picture and go, she's leaving, right? She looks happy. She's leaving for a better gig. Maybe she's retiring. Maybe she actually really hated this job and she's giving a snarky smile to everybody on her way out. But for those that said, happy moving in, this is where I want us to switch our mindset, right? So if we look at this picture and we go, hey, we wanted to make sure that this employee felt like they were a valued part of our team. And so in advance, we actually sent them a box. And the instructions for the box were bring in all the things that bring you joy and make your office space feel unique to you. Some people might not put anything in that box, right? Some people have desks that are very minimalistic. Some people might fill that box with a bunch of tchotchkes, right? Maybe something else we can't see is off screen, that she's being clapped into the office and that people are really excited for her to be there. I give this example because I think it's how we can shift our thinking when it comes to employee experience. Think differently than we've ever thought before about it, right? How do we start to get the mind frame of being more employee centric, flexibility friendly, having that collaboration mindset, bringing transparency into our organizations, staying digitally connected, right? And have that diversity and well-being focus like we've never had before. So if you're like, yep, Shari, this sounds great, where do we go from here? I want to walk through how you get started really creating better experiences for your employees. So this puts HR at the core. We become this curator of experience, and our role had continued to evolve. You know, I think when I first got into HR a little over 17 years ago, I really saw HR as the policy police. It's one of the reasons I actually didn't want to come into this profession. But that's changed, right? We've moved from, you know, the back room to the boardroom. We've gone from, you know, administering policy to being marketers. Now we're moving into this role of being experience creators. And so this really encourages us to think differently about our office environments, how we support our new hires as they come into the organization, how we help our employees connect with others, both their peers, their managers, and their leaders, how we create more stickiness for that emotional involvement. I'm sure you've all heard the term quiet quitting, right? That has to do with leveraging that discretionary effort and employees deciding that giving that discretionary effort is no longer of value to them. So how do we reframe that for them and help them come back to that desire to give discretionary effort? Not that it's required, obviously. It also gives us the ability to focus more on retention and rewarding good work. So let's start with some tactics then. I want you to start with understanding the voice of your employee. I put this image up because I think if we can think of employees as stars, right? So stars have writers, you know, when they go and they perform. So let's say that this star's writer is, hey, I really want M&Ms in my dressing room, but I only want the green M&Ms, right? You might be thinking, sure, there's no way we're ever going to curate these custom experiences at that level for our employees. Probably not. But where can you start? You can start by finding out what they want. So do surveys, do employee focus groups, have one-on-one conversations, polls, engagement surveys. If you're not doing stay interviews, I highly recommend those as well. It's a great way to get a pulse on where your employees are at in a really personal way. And it doesn't have to be this big overblown interview. You can have during your one-on-one, you can say like, hey, you know what, if somebody was going to approach you to leave the organization, what would be the one thing that would entice you to leave, right? You might be surprised at the answers. It could be paid time off. It could be more development opportunities. Especially in nonprofits, it could be money, but your environments are in such that that's very limited. So I have the feeling that there's a lot of values there. And so maybe it's as simple as, hey, the organization's values don't align with me anymore. Having stay interviews will get you to that data. Next, map your current experience. You know, this is such an interesting activity because as you go through each one of these experiences that your candidates and your employees have, things are going to start to come to light that you just didn't realize. So we did this activity, this was probably 5 years ago now, where we looked at specifically pre-boarding and onboarding. So the time before day one that you start. And what we found out is that our candidates were receiving anywhere from 20 to 25 emails in the 2-week time frame before they started with us. The emails were all valid, right? Some were from the system, their login credentials and their passwords. Some was from the hiring manager. Some was from the recruiter. Some was from the HR department. Some might have been from their peers if they had gotten notice in advance that they had a new hire starting. Think about what that experience was though for that candidate, right? How do I make sure that I'm saving the right emails to know where to go day one, how to log in, how to get my equipment? So in that process, we went from 25 emails to 5 emails, and 2 of those emails came from the system. One was a link and one was the password. So really we went down to 3 very concise emails. And it didn't mean that we put all of that text from all those emails in there. We got really, really clear about what the intent of those emails were and how we were setting that employee up for success. So you're probably going to find that in a lot of these areas, as you map these experiences, that you might have to consider communication or the environment or the technology being used in each one of these experiences. And so as you learn what is happening in your organization, start implementing change. And I will say, start small. Sometimes I think we look at a project like this and go, I don't even know to wrap my head around any of this data. Pick one category and start making small changes. Maybe it's something as simple as, hey, we're sending too many emails, or it's, hey, we need to change our follow-up process for this program. They can be small implementations for sure. All right, next I want you to think about the candidate experience, right? This one I think is really fascinating to me because your candidates may become employees, they may not become employees. And the experience that you're curating for them can have a huge impact on future employees and your business as well. So organizations like Glassdoor and Indeed give candidates the opportunity to review their interview experience. So that information can be public. You know, before I joined Paylocity, this was many years ago, I had started at an organization and they had sent me a congratulatory cookie basket. And I thought it was such a thoughtful gift. And it really communicated their culture to me that I was a valuable member of their community before I even started. Think about that narration that you're creating. So let's start with application process, right? Do you have a one-click apply option, or is it, hey, upload your resume and then you get to the next screen and then you have to copy and paste this, and then you get to the next screen and it's a bunch of screener questions, and then the next screen and the next screen. So maybe it's 10 screens they have to get through, and then they get ghosted. You never respond to them because maybe they didn't get through your screener questions, right? Think about what that would feel like as a candidate when you're thinking about that experience. And so as you think about what pillars you want to pull there, strong communication, trust and partnership, creating connections. Allison, I saw you came back online. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I actually do, and it pertains to prior to hire. And I've heard some concern, and I think it would be interesting to hear from your perspective. From what I've been hearing, word on the curb is HR directors use AI when they are reviewing resumes. And sometimes if those resumes, and believe I am not an AI person, so like consider me your average bear, and this is only what I'm hearing. Um, the concern for, let's say, candidates is that maybe they're not using all the appropriate AI buzzworthy words to have that hiring manager's attention or grab it. What is your perspective on that? How can it be used for a nonprofit HR manager as a tool without maybe missing out on some really great potential candidates?
I love this question. A couple of things. So I won't go too deep into an AI primer, but algorithms have existed for a while. So applicant tracking systems have algorithms already built into them. If you're doing screener questions, right, you can build in your knockout questions. So that is a form of AI, just to put that out there. I definitely hear what you're talking about, though, this idea that kind of the machine is reading it all before it's surfacing the information to you. So there's two things. As an organization, your AI should never be your sole reviewer of any information. This is especially important because if you look at what's coming out of the EEOC, what they're saying is that if you use software in HCM and HRS, other tools that have AI and it's helping you make decisions, if that creates disparagement, you are liable as the organization, not the software, not the AI. So there always has to be human intervention. I will put that out there. So as you think about using these tools, it might help you rank the resumes easier. It might help you see which ones are going to float to the surface better for you, but there should always be human intervention. The tools are not sophisticated enough to take out that human component of it. So for applicants, what advice I have been giving them is follow up just the same as you would. I know that some organizations, the way that they have done this is they've added actually to the bottom of their job descriptions, your resume is being applied through our applicant tracking system. If you would like a additional human review, please contact this number or email us here. So even giving, like, that's super transparency, right? Even giving the candidate that, hey, if you just are like, I don't know, we'll have a human review it on top of what the system's doing.
Thank you so much. And I think another important question to ask you, because I know our audience pretty well, is this may be something you're very comfortable with and accustomed to, but it may be new to some of our smaller organizations. And they may be thinking about utilizing some of the tools and software. Is there anything that you would recommend, let's say like, AI HR 101 software that's easy to use, navigate, learn, and oftentimes, just so oftentimes our executive directors may only have one other person in the office. They may be everything from the secretary to the CEO. So something that's easy to learn also.
Yeah, so that's actually a super big question because I probably have a billion ideas for you. I would say start with ChatGPT because it's free, or Copilot if you're using Microsoft 360 Suite. Microsoft has Copilot, it's the same thing. And the way I would suggest you start utilizing the tools to get yourself familiar with them is start with communications. That's kind of like the easiest place to dip your toe in, right? You're writing a communication, put it into the chat as a prompt and say, hey, the tone of our company is casual, but a little bit witty. Can you help me rewrite this with that tone, right? And it'll spit stuff out to you. The things that you have to be concerned about or very careful about when it comes to putting stuff into these models is you don't want to put any proprietary information. You don't want to put any employee names. You don't want to load any documents that are programs you're working on that you don't want to be kind of part of that large language model that it's going to pull from going forward. Those are the things to think about. But I have other resources, Allison, that I can send you that we can send out on Monday with this recording. I have a cheat sheet for how to write prompts. It's a Paylocity cheat sheet, but feel free to send it out. And we actually did a webinar 2 weeks ago about AI and HR, and I can send you that link as well for the audience if they want to watch
Oh,
it.
thank you. I'm
Totally
sure that would be
glad you're
very
here.
much appreciated and really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
it can be very overwhelming when this is not your everyday day to day. And I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation,
No,
but I know what
please.
they're asking and what they're talking about sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Interrupts away. The more questions, the better. And this deck will be provided after the fact. So if for whatever reason we run out of time, you'll still have access to all the content.
And just before you move on, if anybody does have any questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. And when there's a pause, I will jump in and ask Shari on your behalf.
Love it. So candidate experience. One thing you can also start with is partnering with your managers. So during those intake meetings, or maybe those intake meetings are having between you and your leadership, and you're having the conversation about, what do we want for this candidate? How do we want this person to look? What are their requirements? What is their experience? I think we've all been in those conversations where the person that's being described is like this, purple unicorn squirrel that is great at technology and super high in emotional intelligence. So having those intake meetings in advance can really help you frame that conversation with the hiring managers as to what your process is going to look like, what experience you're going to create for them, as well as the candidate, and especially what you expect out of that hiring manager. So if you're in an organization where you only present 5 candidates, how does the hiring manager know how those candidates have been evaluated before they get to the manager? If you're in an organization where you're going to give the manager all of the resumes and you're going to review them together, kind of what's your rubric that you're going to use to evaluate them? All those conversations can happen in advance so that once it gets to the hiring decision, you have some of those tools in place already to leverage them. Next thing is really thinking about your brand, leveraging your brand. I think a lot about brand because there are brands that I've absolutely fallen in love with that have really great stories. So for those of you that know who Bamba Socks are, right? They donate socks based on socks you purchase. They donate it to those that are homeless. And it's such a great mission. And the socks are stupid expensive. They're just socks. But I'm willing to pay the money because I know what their mission is, and it appeals to me and my values as a human being. So how do we create that same sort of excitement, that same sort of stickiness with your brand for your employees, right? We want them to be able to see themselves sitting and fitting in your organization, and that impact of that brand will follow your organization. So you've probably heard of Salesforce, you've probably heard of Zappos or Netflix for good cultures. You've probably heard in the HR world, like what have they been doing, the books that they've been writing. So good brand matters. I don't have this on the screen, but if you don't know what Glassdoor is, or you don't know what your Glassdoor rating is, I highly encourage you to do that. Take a look at that, or Yelp or Better Business Review. The reviews for your organization, candidates are looking at that in advance. So something to think about there. And then just future-proofing your hiring as we think forward, right? Some of these challenges can really become opportunities. So taking that holistic approach to a candidate's needs. It could be something as simple as your interview format, right? If you are focusing on diversity at your core and you're thinking about that interview process and you're hiring somebody who might be autistic, you might want to rethink, hey, maybe in this scenario, we don't do a video interview because we know that statistically those don't go as well as if we just done a phone interview, right? It's being more cognizant of those things and thinking through them. And then really leaning into data. I don't spend a ton of time talking about data during this deck, but it's so important to look at your data over and over to see where you're making changes, especially as you think about things like those surveys we talked about a little bit earlier, your engagement surveys and those kinds of things. How do your employees feel with the changes that you're making? Which leads into your employee value proposition. So this is really the part of the candidate experience where they get to see from your own employees what it feels like to work there. And it's really that extension of your values and culture. It's kind of like the sales pitch for your employees to be able to give to potential candidates. Right before we jumped on this call, I was talking to somebody about family members working in organizations, right? And that tells a story that you love the organization so much that you wanted to bring your family, because we all know how family dynamics could be. So if you trust your family to work there, it must be a good place to work. But why does it matter, right? So EVPs matter because it really provides that comprehensive look into each role, it makes it attractive to candidates, shows a little bit more about the culture to making sure that they're a good fit. And it's going to set you apart from the competition, right? If all your employees can talk about your organization the same way, not sounding like robots, right? Having their own spin on it, it really gives your employer brand that elevated look, and you become a desirable place to look. So this is Paylocity's EVP, people who care doing work that matters, #forward together. So how does this come to life, right? So I'll tell you about how this comes to life for me. My core why, if you've read Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, my core why is helping people reach their aha moments. And so when I get to do this kind of work where I get to speak to people in the HR community, or I get to host a podcast, or I get to go to conferences, it gives me an opportunity to care for other people, to do work that I feel like matters, and gives me the opportunity to give back to the larger HR community, right? Paylocity allows me to do that, and being part of a community that cares about people and cares about doing work that matters matches to my values, right? That was like 3 sentences, right? If your employees can tell those types of stories with your EVP, you're going to make a big impact. So we're going to talk now about how this comes to life now as we think about the priorities in this new era of work. I haven't seen any other questions come in. Feel free to post them. You won't throw me off if you have a question as we go through this. So if we go into kind of what has changed over the last 4 years, it leads us to see how the priorities in organizations have changed. And so I want to talk through these new expectations that are driving this idea of a modern workforce. So employee well-being, work freedom, diversity, equity, inclusion. Here at Paylocity, we say accessibility. So it's DEIA for us. Some organizations have added a B for belonging. Other organizations like SHRM have actually moved inclusion to the front of this list. So you'll continue to see those changes when it comes to diversity initiatives. And then the modernization of HR. I'll talk a little bit about AI on that slide, but I think that was a great question, Allison, that you had brought up earlier. So as we start to think about the view of a holistic employee, though, it really needs to start with psychological safety. And I want to share a personal story from my career that really highlights when a manager for me gave me a lot of psychological safety and how that changed my view of the role in the company. So I had come into a brand new role in this organization. It was a small company, a real estate development company, about 79 employees. And I had been there about a week and a half, maybe. And my boss pulls me aside and says, "Hey, I need to give you some history on the person that was here before you." It's like, okay. She's like, "It might impact, your success. It might impact how people see you. It's something for you to keep in mind." I'm like, all right. So she walks me through that the previous person who was handling HR and payroll benefits had embezzled about $500,000 from the organization through payroll. Completely shocked. This obviously wasn't public information. So think about stepping into a role knowing that there's no trust in this role, right? The previous person who had been a close friend of the business owner had embezzled money, right? So another week later, she comes in my office. She's like, "Hey, now that your feet are wet, right? Being there 2.5 weeks, we have some terminations for you to do." And I'm like, great. I've been here 2 weeks. People are going to start calling me the Grim Reaper, right? I was like, okay, who are we letting go? And, are we doing severance packages, that kind of thing? So she's like, "Yeah, we're doing severance packages. It's going to be the CFO, the director of operations, and the head of maintenance." So nobody wants to hear that you're going to be the person who's going to let go the CFO. And so I get all my ducks in a row. I get the severance paperwork together. We go up to deliver our first termination conversation with the CFO. And I ask her in advance, like, "Hey, do these employees know that this is coming? Has there been performance conversations?" There had not. So not only am I new, but I'm going in to surprise them with this information. So we sit down with that leader. We go through the documentation. Obviously, this person is upset. They leave. And I get a phone call about 5 minutes later when I get to my office. And this person says to me, like, "Hey, I'm looking through my paperwork. You gave me the paperwork for so-and-so. This isn't my paperwork." my heart fell to the floor. I was so careful about putting the documents in folders and not wanting anybody to see I didn't write the names on the folders. When I went upstairs, I had grabbed the wrong folder. So I'm sitting there with all that knowledge that I have going, oh, I just got myself fired. Like I'm getting fired today. I would fire me. Like this is a problem, right? So I walk upstairs to my boss and I say, hey, I effed up. I gave so-and-so the wrong paperwork. And she's like, well, how'd that happen? I explained it. And she looked at me and she goes, that probably won't ever happen again, will it? And I was like, well, no, it won't ever happen again. And she's like, all right. She's like, let's go tell, the owner what happened. Did you get so-and-so's correct paperwork? And I said, yeah. And so we went and had that conversation and nothing happened. Meaning that taking the ownership of the mistake and having that really awkward conversation, she was able to demonstrate for me the psychological safety that existed in that organization with her and her trust in my skill set and why she had hired me. Now, would every leader make that decision in that moment? Probably not. But I was glad she's did. And that is such an extreme example of psychological safety. But I think it highlights just how important it is your employees need to know that they have that space to innovate, to fail, to take some risk, to know that they can come to you as a trusted partner, either as a leader or as an HR person, and give really good information and feedback. I love that Allison comes off camera. It's like
I'm back.
my favorite thing.
I don't want to steal your stage, but but I do have some questions that I think this is a good part to
Yeah.
interject and ask. So you bring up a couple of really interesting points, and one of one of the things that I have found being in the nonprofit industry is that the cultures are somewhat different when you work for a nonprofit because you are often limited with staff, resources, time, versus maybe, say, a for profit. And that sometimes is reflective in the culture where maybe you're expected to, or you just feel obligated to be available, work around the clock, and that can be wearing sometimes on a human being who's working. Can you share with us in terms of, and I'm hearing a lot of what you're talking about is culture, company culture. And I think that's so important because as nonprofits that are now moving into the future of this workforce, um, sometimes there are people, they're direct service, so they have to be there. It's not like they can work remotely.
Yep.
Have you heard or have you learned about maybe different things that a nonprofit could interject into their culture or their practice where employees are able to possibly take advantage of things that um, support their mental well-being and their joy, overall joy in being at work, when there is a demand for them to be there. Um, whereas, and then, and kind of start instituting that new culture because it's hard to find people to work in a nonprofit these days. It's harder to hold on to them.
Yep.
So if you have any recommendations for those that are sitting on the call that when maybe you don't have the luxury of being able to work remotely, what are some of the other things that can be instituted into this culture where they're not burning out and not feeling mentally safe?
Yeah. I love that because you're right. There's a lot of roles right now that can't be hybrid or fully remote. And so that's a population that's important. I also like the fact that you might not have funds. So, if all my suggestions are like, hey, buy this app, do this, right? That's not going to be helpful, right? So I think there's a couple things that I've seen is um, one, and this is a more tactical example from the leadership level. When it comes to scheduling, if you can introduce some flexibility at the employee level for scheduling, that's a really great place to introduce some flexibility without actually having to change your policy. It's a process change. So let's say that you already have the option of shift swapping or coverage, build that into whatever system that you're using and give employees the ability to do that on their own as long as they follow the process criteria, right? That's something that's kind of a low-hanging fruit where you can introduce some flexibility in a different way. The second thing is prioritize having conversations about what setting boundaries looks like in your organization and that's safe for you. So I agree. There have been plenty of times in my own HR career where I have felt like I need to be on accessible 24/7, especially if I was in an HR department of one, right? Like you shared earlier, Allison, you might be the person or, one of two people. And so how do you set boundaries? Um, it can be tough. I think you have to decide as an individual, what are the spaces that you need to protect for your own mental health? That might be, hey, I protect my first 10 minutes in the morning and I do meditation or reading or working out, or I protect my dinner time, because I have kids and that's my time to sit with them. So I would introduce that. The second thing is, how are you building that social camaraderie amongst your employees so that they have sounding boards that aren't just complaint sessions? I was going to use a different word, but we're going to be all PC here.
I was waiting for it. We would have bleeped it out, but it's okay. I think we all know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
like that's important, having that ability to vent and to talk about what's going on in your life, but to do it in a way where, hey, either I need to have a conversation. I've used this expression before, like I need to have a below the line conversation because I just need to get it off my chest, compared to like I want you to fix this problem.
Mm.
And then I think the last piece is like, be really close and make sure that your employees have a way to share what's going on back to the organization so that you can get ahead of the burnout. You can get ahead of some of the emotional stuff that you're going to see by asking those questions and providing avenues for them to give feedback. Um, I think that's the thing I've seen so much is that when we've had these conversations with other leaders, they're like, yeah, well, my employees want all these things, but I don't really know what they want. Or they're complaining about this, but then when I did a focus group, I realized that this was actually the problem, not the thing that they were complaining about. It was just a symptom. So hopefully those are some good suggestions that the group can explore.
Absolutely, and I'm taking notes also so we can share it with the group
Okay.
afterward. I do have one other follow-up question
Yeah.
because it really kind of speaks to how, the nonprofit field is evolving. Uh, Oftentimes now, and I'm speaking for myself personally, there there may be an organization that only can afford or only wants a fractional, and I can't say employee, right? So somebody that's serving as like a fractional executive director or a fractional CFO. And this is like a term that's newish to me. I don't know how new it is in the HR world, but how do you, if you're familiar with it, how would you suggest a nonprofit manages that to create a positive culture for the organization overall and be appealing to, potential candidates?
Oh, I love that. I mean, I think that there's a couple of things. I don't know that I've heard the term fractional. That might be more unique to the
Oh, it's
nonprofit.
all the rage.
Yeah, I have it. I'm gonna have to Google that one. Because to me that means gig. Like that seems synonymous the way you were describing it with a gig. This is going to be a CFO gig for so many hours, right? That's kind of the equivalent that you're talking about, right?
Well, so I'm essentially, it's not my official title, but I have my own company and I act as an executive director for several different
Yep.
organizations.
Yep.
So
So
and I've been here for years.
yeah. So those are your side hustle gigs, right? But you are I'm not minimizing the word gig because you are very invested in those things that you're doing. So I think there's a couple things. Being very transparent about how your organization is designed. I think that's important. Paylocity actually has two CEOs. We have co-CEOs, which is really interesting for a publicly traded company. We have it for a very specific reason. One of our CEOs has been around a very long time, is very invested in our product and our marketing avenues, and one is more kind of financial focused and on our sales and that kind of side of the org, and it's working very well for us. But we had to be very transparent about why we were making that choice to do that. Making it appealing for the person coming on board, right? I think this is where you have to decide what level of person you want in the organization in that role, meaning that there might be leaders who are looking to get their feet in the door at nonprofits to build their resume, right? Or they might want their feet in the door to nonprofits as something that they're very passionate about. And so painting that picture of the opportunities of either appealing to their passion, right, or appealing to an item in their professional development. I think both are really good tactics. I think transparency is key, though. Like, you have to be really clear about what that role is, how it plays a part in the decision making of the organization, and its expectations to promote your culture.
And you will see in nonprofit also, there are co-executive directors or an assistant executive director. That's becoming more prevalent
Yeah,
also.
yeah,
So just to help those that are on the call right now, if these might be questions that they have, that maybe they're not thinking of, but it is kind of the wave of the future of nonprofit too. If you're with, let's say, a small to mid-sized nonprofit,
yeah.
because you're
Wonderful.
trying to make it work,
Right?
you're really trying to make it work.
All right. So psychological safety. If you haven't seen this graph before, I think it's a fun one. So on the left is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. On the right is kind of how this comes to life in the employee's world. So great graphic to just kind of root yourself into how to think about the employee holistically. Want to talk a little bit about employee well-being. This statistic's a little bit older, right? That people have been concerned about the result of the virus, but when I think about employee well-being, I think it's a great opportunity for us to rethink how we provide resources for our employees. If you have an employee resource group as part of your benefits offering, rethink how you use that. When we went through this change with the pandemic, we leaned into our EAP and we realized that, one of the things that we had that we didn't realize we had is that you get 3 free counseling sessions per incident. We thought it was per year. And so that was something that we could have a conversation with our employees about. We also realized that EAPs have a lot of other resources that aren't utilized, like helping find childcare or pet sitters or will writing or financial support or free legal advice. Those are all things that are going to affect an employee's experience outside the home, but ultimately they're a great resource for you as an employer to be able to show that you care. Next is I want to talk about work freedom and flexibility. So if you have an organization that is hybrid or fully remote, flexibility means something very different than if you have roles that have to be totally on site. In the hybrid, fully remote environment, flexibility means I want to choose where I work, when I work, how I work, who I work with, what technology I use. If you're on site in a role, some of those same desires exist, but they look different in how you're going to manifest them. So for those fully remote people, you might be able to offer that kind of flexibility. They might be able to pick between a Windows computer or a Mac computer. They may be able to say, I want to work more with this population and not with this population. That flexibility might not exist for those that need to be on site for their job. So what flexibility can you introduce to them? Talked a little bit about shift swapping. The other thing that I found is really interesting is just asking those employees for their feedback more often on things like your benefit offerings or how you handle rewards and recognition, right? What's going to be most impactful for them? And what does flexibility look like for them? Is there an opportunity if they wanted to do, I work half a day instead of a full day, right? Just getting really creative about how flexibility looks compared to how it's looked in the past is really where we're seeing that shift. Especially when it comes from location to time flexibility, we're seeing that a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how this idea of flexibility changes, because as we hit the pandemic, the pendulum was very swayed towards what the employees desired. It has swung back now more towards the employer side of the equation, but not fully back to where it was before. There is some things that have stayed on. Flexibility is one of them. Talked a little bit already about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. This is no longer a check the box. This now becomes the foundation of how we approach work. And so really lean into thinking about how all of the programs you're doing affects this. We uncovered something recently where we had a policy in place, a guideline in place, not a policy, where you had to be in your role at least a year before you could get promoted into a leadership position. And so this particular manager had 5 people on his team. He had a team lead position that opened up. And when he looked at the pool of applicants on his team, The only person who would be qualified based on that guideline was a white male. But he also had 2 Black females in his organization that had previous management experience and would actually be a better fit for that role than this person. And so the dilemma was, well, what am I supposed to do? We have this guideline in place. That's where the guideline is wrong, right? So be flexible to think about the barriers you might be creating that you weren't even realizing you're creating to hire and promote the right candidates. That's just one example of how to think differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion impact. The other thing I would say is something that we've done in the last several years that I've really appreciated is celebrating different cultures' important dates and bringing in speakers to talk about different things that we wouldn't consider. And that has just been very eye-opening to all of the different cultures that exist inside of our organization and how we celebrate all of those. So just a couple more slides here, and then we'll open it back up for questions. Last but not least, employees want a modern HR department, right? So they want not a one-size-fits-all peanut butter approach to being handled as employees, but they want a really agile approach in their HR department that has that partner mindset. They want somebody who's continuously learning, attending sessions like this, and they want somebody who's tech savvy. And I say this now because I think this is really important. If you've been in HR a long time, make sure you're staying close to the technology that's evolving, like AI, right? Become tech savvy, because as we look at that Gen Alpha that's going to be hitting our workforce in the next 5-ish years here, they're going to be very tech savvy, right? And so how do we plan ahead for that and get ourselves prepared for that? So my last slide is just a little bit about me and the Paylocity resources. I host an HR podcast. It's called HR Mixtape. You can find it on all the podcast players. And I am on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with anybody who wants to connect. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen and open it back up to see if there's any other questions or anything that came to mind for you, Allison, that you want to talk about.
Shari, I could be on the phone with you for easily another hour. You clearly know your business very well. I think there's so many different questions, and there's so many different nonprofits in very different stages of the organization. So I could try to ask you from every perspective, but every organization has different needs. They're all unique to some extent, no matter if it's for profit or nonprofit, right? I think it would be really helpful, though, if you had any resources that you would think would be helpful to mention. The mental health piece is huge for everybody. If there are any resources that our attendees could access that might help them in presenting it to their board, if there are resources in terms of AI. Again, many times we have very small staff, or we have one person doing everything who's not actually trained in HR.
Yep.
Things like that are really helpful. And if you want to send those along to us, that would be great. We'll be happy to share them with our group. And I got to tell you, even listening to you, Paylocity, I actually emailed Corey. I was like, wow, you work for a really great company. You guys clearly have your culture down pat. And that's something to aspire to for all of us, because it sounds like everybody's pretty happy working there.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can institute that here in our nonprofit organizations.
Yeah. A couple resources I can mention. I'll make sure to send some more links though. Liz actually mentioned NAMI. NAMI is a fantastic organization for mental health awareness and information. They also are, in my experience, having worked with them in the past, very willing to do presentations to people. So great resource there. The other thing I would say is, in the communities you're in, look at your Chamber of Commerce. I know it sounds like an interesting place to go for information, but usually somebody listed in your Chamber of Commerce is really interested to talk about their business. So they might have something there that's really unique to the work that you're doing that you could tap into and say, hey, can you come and talk about this a little bit? So you mentioned that AI, I will send over some resources for that. If you aren't an HR person by trade, I will send you a link, Allison, to this person who has this great YouTube channel, and he does these short clips of HR concepts which are very, very impactful. So if you're like, hey, I don't know how to think about succession planning, short video, right? He's a great free
Oh,
resource.
that's yeah, and succession planning is often a hot topic around here
Yeah.
that our audience really wants to hear about. And just in terms of Paylocity, because I would like, would love to give you the opportunity to really clearly communicate with our group. Do you work with organizations of certain sizes? Do you work with everybody? Is there something in particular that you want to bring to the attention of the nonprofits here that Paylocity could help provide support with?
Yeah, well, so Paylocity is a company, as a human capital management system, as a platform. Yes, we work for nonprofits. We have a lot of nonprofits as part of our clients. If you're looking for an HRIS or HCM, definitely reach out to Corey. I'm sure you can share his information. As far as me personally and the work that I do for Paylocity as an advocate to the HR community, I host monthly thought leadership webinars. They are open to the public. If you go to paylocity.com/resources under webinars, those are where they get posted. Our back webinars are also there available to view. You can just click on them and play them. So a wealth of information there. I had mentioned the podcast. As far as looking for speakers, I'm always willing to come in and speak to an organization. So if you want to connect with me directly on LinkedIn, if you have a topic that you're like, hey, I haven't heard anybody talk about this, I'd love to brainstorm a conversation, I'm definitely willing to do that.
Awesome. Well, I hope I didn't tap you out because I know you have to go to Cleveland.
No, I'll be good. I have a different deck for Cleveland, so it's
Oh,
okay.
great. Okay, good. Thank you so much. Really tremendously helpful. And if you can follow up with us with all those links, we'll be sure to share it with everybody. And I want to thank everybody today for joining us. For those of you that have not really been familiar with Paylocity, please go ahead, go to their website. You can get in touch with us. We'll put you in touch with either Shari, if you have a specific question for her. If you're interested in working with Paylocity, we can connect you with them as well. And if you haven't joined the Nonprofit Resource Hub, you got to do it. So thank you so much, Shari. Safe flight. And hopefully we'll be talking again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.